Chapter 10. At home my wife unrolled a mat, spread a soft pillow, and insisted upon my lying down to rest, turning a deaf ear to all my pleading that I was in a perfectly normal condition. She went in to make coffee and nourishment for me.
She went on grumbling. Not eating properly, not sleeping, not resting. God knows why you wear yourself out in this manner.
How could I tell her about Rangi? It would be awkward and impossible. But I could not explain the matter leaving out Rangi.
And if my wife should ask, when and where did Rangi meet you? I would not be able to reply. I thought it would be best to accept the situation and rest my weary body on the mat and consume whatever was placed before me. Anyway, no one was going to miss me, and nothing in the program was going to be altered because I wasn't there.
The whole program was so well organized and started that nothing could be halted. That was the chief trouble now. Neither Vasu nor the temple authorities seemed prepared to relax their plans ever so slightly. Each was moving in a fixed orbit as if nothing else mattered or existed.
After the refreshment she had provided me, I fell into a drowse. What had really been the matter with me was lack of food and sleep. Now I was having both and benefiting by them. I enjoyed the luxury of floating off on drifting cotton wool in the air, the sort of sensation I experienced immediately I shut my eyelids.
My wife sat at my side, fanning me. She had a lot of anxiety on her mind about me. I don't know what she had heard.
I myself had no notion what my state had been before I let out the shout about the elephant. My wife had dressed herself in her heliotrope silk sari, which she reserved for special occasions. It indicated that she considered the temple function a most important one. It depressed me to see her forego it. I had implored, please go and enjoy yourself at the temple.
I can look after myself quite well. Don't worry about ink. She ignored my advice, replying rather light-heartedly, I went there only because you were there, which pleased me.
She added, not that I care for these crowds. Babu is crazy about it, and has taken out all the savings in his money box for sweets and toys. Oh, I should be with him.
I could give him such a nice time, I said remorsefully. You will do us all a favor if you keep away from the crowd, she said. Now sleep a little.
Why am I being treated like a baby? I protested. She did not answer, and I fell asleep, until I heard soft hammer strokes on the walls of cotton wool which had encased me.
But when the hammer stroke ceased, I heard voices, and then my wife stood over me. A ray of evening sun thickened with iridescent specks of dust came in through the ventilator of our dining hall. It used to have a red glass pane when we were young, and would make me sick when the evening sun threw a blood-red patch on the wall.
Luckily the red pane had been smashed one mango season, by a stone thrown by a street urchin who had actually aimed at the fruits ripening on the trees in our garden, and the pane had never been replaced. My wife said, someone to see you. She did not like any visitor to disturb me.
Her tone was hostile. She added, his name is Muthu. Seems to be from a village.
Immediately I was on my feet. Ah, Muthu. Muthu.
Come in please. He had his umbrella hooked as usual to his forearm. I wanted to see you and so came.
I told the mistress of the house that I would wait until you were awake. Why did you disturb yourself? Go back and rest.
I will wait. I resisted his suggestion, but he was so firm and insistent that I had no alternative but to go back to my mat. I sheepishly turned back, and he followed me and sat down on the edge of the mat, carefully laying his umbrella on the floor beside his feet.
He looked around appreciatively and cried, what a big house you have. Do you live in the whole of it or have you rented out a portion? I lay back on my pillow and hotly repudiated the idea.
I never want to be or ever wanted to be a rent collector. We have always entertained guests rather than tenants. I put into my sentence all the venom I wanted to inject into the memory of Vasu.
It all depends, Muthu said. There is no harm in making a little money out of the space you do not need. It depends, I echoed.
My wife will never permit me, even if I wanted it. Then you can do nothing about it, he said. It's best to listen to the advice of one's wife, because sooner or later that's what everyone does.
Even the worst bully, I know my own uncle, such a bully for 40 years, but at 60, he became a complete slave to his wife. If people are not slaves before 60, they become slaves after 60, he said. He was trying to amuse me, a sick man.
It was clear he was trying to steer away from the topic of the procession and the temple affairs. He waits for her command every moment, and even stands and sits according to her direction, he said and laughed. It really amused me, this picture of the bully fawning on his wife at 60.
I cried to my wife, "Coffee for my friend." At which he shouted, "Good lady, no, don't trouble yourself, no coffee for me." "Don't listen to him, but bring the coffee or make it if you haven't got it ready," I cried.
He sent back a call, "Good lady, if you must be troubled, let it be just cold water, a glass of water." "Is it impossible for me to offer you anything?" I cried.
Yes, I never need anything. I have told you I never take anything outside my home. And yet you want everyone to come and ask for tea at the village,"
I said complainingly. "I never force it on anyone," he said. There was another knock on the door, and presently my wife ran across to open it and came back, followed by saying, "Another cup of coffee," I cried as she went back to the kitchen.
Sane cried, "So good to see you again in this state." The speech went off very well in spite of the interruption. "You really gave a shout which could have gone to the heavens, you know." "Why talk of all that now?" said Muthu.
"Why not?" cried the journalist aggressively. "He is all right. And he was all right."
"Why should not a man let out a shout if it pleases him? This is a free country in spite of all the silly rules and regulations that our governments are weaving around us." By the time my wife was ready with 2 cups of coffee, there was a third knock on the door, followed by another one soon. The pink-coated poet came, followed by the veterinary doctor.
So there was a full assembly on the mat at my house. My wife had to prepare coffee again and again. She accepted the situation cheerfully. The important thing was to keep me in good humor at home.
The veterinary doctor felt my pulse and cried, "You are in perfect condition. You must have had some temporary fatigue or something of the kind, a sudden attack of nerves." "I have never felt better any time," I said, although the thought kept troubling me that the veterinarian was trespassing unwarrantedly into human fields. "Haven't you noticed, say, for instance, a dog let out a sudden howl, or an elephant trumpet out for no known cause?
It's the same mechanism in all creatures. In our institute we spend a course of 6 months on comparative anatomy and psychology. Only the stimuli and medicinal doses differ between human beings and animals." As
we were talking, the beam of light on the wall had disappeared and a dull twilight was visible above the central courtyard. It seemed absurd, after all the preparations of weeks, that all of us should be gathered tamely on the mat in my hall instead of bustling about in the temple. What a difference in the picture of the situation as I had visualized it at first and as it turned out to be now.
So I said with a sigh, "All of us should be there at the temple." "There is nothing very much to do at the moment," said the journalist. "This is a sort of intermission.
The main worship is over now, and the poems have been read and dedicated." "I missed it," I said ruefully. The poet said, "You didn't miss much." I
felt too nervous, and I don't think anyone understood anything. "It was quite good," said Sane encouragingly. "Some people came round to ask where they could get copies."
"Probably they expect free copies." "Free or otherwise, the world will have to wait until I am ready to print," I said. Muthu said, "Please give me also a copy." I said, yes, although I was not sure if he read anything. The poet was by nature silent and retiring, and beyond a few sniggerings he said nothing. The journalist had him in complete charge. "Oh, I am sending review copies to 30 newspapers first thing tomorrow, and a special copy to Sahitya Akademi at Delhi. They are wasting funds giving an award to every Tom, Dick, and Harry. For the first time they are going to have a chance to recognize real literature. Our government have no lack of funds, but they don't know how to spend properly. That's what is the matter with them. I am going to show them a way to redeem themselves." I put this into the chairman's speech pretty strongly, and he just recited it as I wrote it, although he is a congressman. He laughed at the memory of this trick. Night fell. Lights were switched on. My wife began her work in the kitchen. I could hear the clinking of vessels. I said, all my responsibilities coming back to my mind one by one. Did the flour supply? Did they? I fretted about it all until they assured me that everything was going well. And then one by one they came round to asking what really had upset me. I had to tell them about Vasu's plans. They were incensed. Who is this upstart to come and disturb us?
We will get the police to seize his gun. We'll throw him out of this town.
I'll knock him down with a hammer, if it comes to that. I suggested, why not change the route? Why should we?
We will change nothing for the sake of this man. We will twist his neck so that he faces the other way. It'll not be possible.
The route has been fixed and the license taken for it. It will be impossible to change anything. Why not drop the procession altogether? Thousands of persons to be frustrated because of this fool, is it?
No, never. We'll deal with him. We have been too tolerant.
Or why not leave the elephant out? Impossible. What's a procession worth without an elephant? You know how much we've spent on the elephant.
I'll be with Kumar myself, and let's see what happens. He is more sound in mind than any human being in this town. No, let us disparage no one, said Senator. He swore, and the others agreed.
We'll take the procession route as arranged. Nothing shall be changed. Malm became extremely nervous about his elephant.
He lowered his voice and said, I knew something had been going on. It started long ago. Do you know that tailor?
He is a friend of Vasu, fancies himself a part owner of the elephant. And I heard, I don't know, he has already received money from Vasu and has given him a document transferring to him his share of the elephant. I heard also a rumor that it was Vasu who had tried to poison Kumar.
Aha, said the doctor. I suspected something like it. They sallied out in great rage, determined to tackle Vasu in a body.
I could not stop them. They were a determined lot. In their numbers they felt strong.
First, led by the journalist, they called on the district superintendent of police at his home in Lawley Extension, for which purpose they hired Gafur's taxi at the fountain and drove to his house. They found that he had just come from a long journey and was hoping to put up a reclining chair and rest on the terrace with a paper in hand. Sain was his friend.
He went straight to the terrace and spoke to him. After listening to their complaint, he said, How do you know that he is going to create a disturbance? How do you know that he will employ his gun in the manner you suggest?
He has an arms license, hasn't he? So any man with an arms license can shoot at anything, is it? Wonderful laws.
The DSP was annoyed at the contemptuous reference to the laws and retorted, That depends. We cannot simply snatch away a licensed firearm because someone thinks he will shoot. So you want to wait until damage is done? We cannot take action unless there is concrete evidence or consequence. Can't you do something to prevent possible damage to life and property?
That only a magistrate may do, but even he cannot bind anyone over without a proper cause. The superintendent was a highly seasoned police officer, seasoned in jargon and technicalities. He refused to accompany them to Vasu's room, but telephoned to the town inspector, Have you made proper arrangements for this evening's procession?
Have enough men to handle the crowd along the route, there must be no trouble or complaints anywhere. I've some people here who apprehend a breach of peace. I want you to go with them and tackle a man who is threatening to create a disturbance.
Go up with them. Meet them at the market fountain in 5 minutes. He gave further instructions to the inspector and Bade the delegation to be gone now.
By the time they had trooped back to the taxi and driven to the fountain, a police officer in uniform was there to receive them. They jumped out of the taxi, surrounded the police official, and gave an account of the impending trouble. He was a tall, lean man with a lot of belts and cross belts, a very serious-looking man with lines on his forehead.
One look at him and they were satisfied that here was a man who would stand no nonsense from anyone, a grim, determined man. He simply repeated the doubts that the superintendent himself had mentioned. If the man possesses a license, he can keep his weapon where he likes.
Who can question him? But can he shoot from the window? Why should he do that?
What's your basis for saying it? They had no answer, and he said, All right, we'll see what we can do. The inspector stayed downstairs.
Led by Sain and supported by the veterinary doctor, with the pink-coated poet bringing up the rear, they boldly went up the staircase and knocked on Vasu's door. They were emboldened considerably by the fact that a real live inspector of police was down below, waiting to appear at the lightest summons. The door opened, and Vasu's head with its dark halo of hair appeared, set off by the light from his room.
You people want to see me now? Yes, said the journalist. Rather urgently. Vasu raised his brows.
Urgent. All of you to see me? And then he counted, 1, 2, 3, 4 persons to call on me.
I don't want to see anyone now. So try again tomorrow. With that, he turned back and tried to shut the door on the visitors.
Since the door opened out, the journalist seized the knob and held back the door. Vasu looked amused. Do you know, I can just pick all 4 of you and toss you downstairs, if you really want to know what I can or can't do.
When I plainly say I don't care to talk, how can you persist? All right. I will give you each a minute, and 1 minute grace.
Be brief. What is it? He was not disposed to admit them.
He blocked the doorway, and they were ranged on the landing. The journalist asked point blank, we have a report that there is likely to be a disturbance while the procession passes down this road. Knowing it, why don't you take the procession around somewhere else?
That's not your concern. We will not tolerate any disturbance. Oh, iron-willed men.
Very good. I agree with you. Don't tolerate any disturbance.
That elephant belongs to no one but to that goddess on the hill road. If anyone tries to harm it, began Muthu, and Vasu said, why don't you mind your tea shop and keep off the flies, but leave these issues to others? Don't try to speak for any elephant.
We know what you have been trying to do, and don't think we are going to stand any nonsense, the veterinary doctor said. I have examined Kumar and know him inside out. He is in a perfect state, more sober than any human being here.
So what? Asked Vasu. If anyone tries to drive him crazy, he'll not succeed, that's what I wish to say. Oh, doctor, you may have an American degree, but you know nothing about animals.
Do they have elephants in America? Try to get into a government department, count your 30 days and draw your sinecures allowance. Why do you bother about these matters?
Poet, say something in your monosyllables. Why are you silent? Don't become smug and let others fight your cause.
Sell me a copy of your verse when it is ready. That's all? Now be off, all of you.
The journalist warned him, we are not bothered about you. We'll leave you alone. You leave our procession alone.
This is a sacred function. People are out there to be with their God. If God is everywhere, why follow him only in a procession? The journalist ignored his remarks and said, hundreds of men and women and children with the chariot. What's the special point about women and children?
You are all practicing chivalry, are you? If men are to be caught in a stampede, why not women and children also? What's the point in saving women and children alone?
What will they do after their men are stamped out? If you are a real philosopher and believe in reincarnation, you should not really mind what happens. If one is destroyed now, one will be reborn within a moment, with a brand new body.
Anyway, do you know why we have so many mellors in our country? So that the population may be kept within manageable limits. Have you not observed it?
Kumbh Mela, thousands and thousands gather. Less than the original numbers go back home, cholera, or smallpox, or they just get trampled upon. How many temple chariots have run over the onlookers in every festival gathering? Have you even paused to think why it's arranged thus? Vasu's philosophical discourse could not proceed further, as the police inspector came upstairs and showed himself at this moment.
He pushed the others aside and accosted Vasu. The inspector asked, you have a gun? I have two, replied Vasu.
I want to see your license. Vasu opened a cupboard, produced a brown envelope, and tossed it at the inspector. The inspector went through it and asked, where are your arms?
Vasu pointed to his rifle on the chair and his revolver on the table. The inspector went over, picked them up, and examined them. Are they loaded? He asked.
Of course they are loaded. They are not toys. Where is your ammunition statement?
In that envelope. When did you discharge your last shot? Shut up, Inspector, and get out. I don't have to answer your questions. What's your authority for coming and questioning me? Our DSP's order.
It's my order that you clear out, with all this bunch of men who have no better business. The journalist protested against the remark. Muthu jumped up and down in rage.
Vasu said, Inspector, you are trespassing in my house. Where is the warrant, which is necessary for you to enter private premises? Come on, produce a warrant.
Otherwise I will complain against you for trespass, and these men will be my witnesses. I'll wire to the Inspector General and the Home Minister. You think you can fool me as you fool all these wretched bullock cart drivers and cobblers and ragamuffins whom you catch hold of and order about.
Whom do you think you are talking to? Be calm, be calm. I came here only as your friend.
Nonsense, you my friend. I have never seen you. I came to ask something of you, that's all.
What is it? Be brief. I just want to suggest, why don't you let me hold your weapons for you in our market station?
You may take them back tomorrow. Vasu said, I see that you are still toying with that gun of mine. Put it down where you took it from.
Come on. Don't play with it. I'll arrest you for disorderly behavior and lock you up for the night or for any length of time under the Public Safety Act.
He took out his whistle and was about to blow on it and call the men who were on patrol on the road below. Before anyone could know what was happening, Vasu plucked the whistle out of the inspector's mouth and flung it away. It went past the landing and fell with a clatter down below amidst pythons and all the stuffed stuff.
The inspector was enraged. He raised his arm and tried to slap Vasu's face. Vasu just reared his head back, shielding his face with his hand, and then gave a sweep with the back of his hand and brought it down with a slicing movement on the inspector's wrist and dislocated it.
The inspector screamed and recoiled as if he had touched fire. He still held the gun in the other hand. I told you to put that gun back where you took it from.
Will you do it or not? You are trying to order me, cried the inspector. Tears of pain welled up in his eyes.
Vasu held him by the shoulder and propelled him to the court and gave him a push down, saying, Take a rest, you poor fish. You should not venture to do things without knowing what's what. And he snatched the gun from his hand and put it away.
The police officer wriggled with pain. Vasu kept looking at him for a while and said with cynical laughter, You have hurt yourself. I did nothing.
I never hit anyone. Years ago I made that vow. If I had hit you with my hand, do you want to see what would have happened?
He brought his palm flat down on the iron frame of the court and cracked it. The inspector watched him mutely. Sane asked, Do you know what the penalty is for assaulting a police officer in uniform? Do you know what the consequences could be for trespass?
Anyway, my lawyer will deal with it. Now all of you leave me. I do not want to hit anyone, you now know why.
Oh, Inspector, you should not have hurt yourself like that. He mocked this man in pain. The veterinarian approached the inspector and said, Let's get this dressed immediately.
Come along, let us go to the hospital. They were all for leaving. Sane said, If anything happens to the people or the procession.
Muthu said, We know what you are trying to do with that elephant. If anything happens. Which?
Only provoked Vasu's mirth. The inspector got to his feet, glared at Vasu, and said, I'll get you for this. The poet alone tried to sneak downstairs without a word.
Vasu just held him by the scruff, turned him round, and asked, Where is your patron saint? Send him up next. He is the one who has sent you all on this foopy's errand, I know.
While all this was happening, as narrated to me by Sane later, at home my wife was arguing with me to stay put on my mat. I had got a passing notion that I should visit the temple and take charge of the procession. My wife was aghast at the thought.
She repeated several times, The doctor has said you must not. What doctor? He is only an animal doctor.
I said. We can't pay serious attention to what he says. But she was adamant and pleaded, Can't you stay in at least one day in a year?
She had prepared a feast for me. She knew all my preferences, potato and onion mash, rice patties fried in oil, chutney ground with green chili, and sauce with brinjal and coconut grating, cucumbers sliced, peppered, and salted, and so on and so forth. She was so full of enthusiasm that I had to prevent her with rude remarks from exceeding 10 courses.
Our house was fragrant with the fryings in the kitchen. All this felicity was meant to be a sort of compensation for me for missing the magnificent flower decorations, music, light, and crowds. My son came home with his schoolteacher and was full of descriptions of what he had seen.
He said, The chariot is made of jasmine buds, and they have fitted small electric bulbs all over it. Father, I bought a sugar cane for the elephant. He snatched it from my hand, and you know how quickly he ate it.
I bought him another one, and that left me with only 6 annas. I bought this whistle. He produced from his pocket a reed whistle and blew through it shrilly.
That mahout has promised to give me a ride on the elephant's back. My friend Ramu says that the elephant is borrowed and that it'll go away tomorrow. Is it a fact, father?
Let us have our own elephant for this temple. The mahout has taught him how to take a garland from a basket and present it to the god. He is very intelligent, father.
Father, please let me go and watch the procession. His mother added from inside, if our neighbors are going and if you promise to stay in and rest, I would like to go and see the start of the procession and come back immediately. The child'll love it.
Can't say when we may have another chance. All right, why don't you let me take you both? No, I don't want to go, she said.
It's not so important. I enjoyed the status of being more important than the procession. Such fussing over one came once in a decade when one fell ill or down a ladder. It was a nice change from always protecting and guiding others and running the household.
I lay back on the mat, picked up a picture book, and tried to read Babu a story, much against his will, as he wanted only to talk about the elephant and the procession. He had been talking of nothing else, whom he met, who fell off the steps leading to the tower of the temple, why the drummer suddenly ceased in the midst of an unraptured performance because he found a grasshopper crawling down his spine. And Babu knew who had perpetrated this trick because he had assisted him in tracking and trapping the grasshopper.
How he and another friend snatched from under the chief priest's nose the plantains kept on a plate for offering to the god, and to this minute no one could guess what had happened to the fruit. He looked triumphantly at me in appreciation of his own exploits. And he narrated how he and his gang had devised a game of hide-and-seek betwixt the legs of the devotees assembled in the hall, and how as they stood in prayer with eyes shut, his friends had crawled between their legs and roused them by tickling their calf muscles.
I realized how he must have multiplied the tasks of that body of men who had been busy since morning chasing out the urchins. And how one of his friends was waiting for a chance to poke a needle into the side of the elephant. At which I remonstrated, never do that.
An elephant will always mark such a fellow in. I thought I might turn his ideas from these dangerous phases and picked up one of his picture books and tried to read him a story. Once upon a time,
I began, but he was not interested. He suddenly got up and ran off to the kitchen on the plea that he felt hungry. Presently my wife called me into dinner.
She had spread out a large plantain leaf and had served my food on it as if I were a rare guest come to the house. She placed a plank for me to sit on. She watched me with satisfaction as I made preparations to eat with relish.
I suggested, why not also put up a leaf for yourself and let us serve ourselves? She turned down my suggestion. She had decided to play the hostess and serve me ceremoniously.
Nothing I suggested was ever going to be accepted today. I enjoyed my dinner, and kept paying her compliments on her excellence as a cook. There was a knock on the door.
Babu, who had finished his dinner by now, ran out to open the door. He came back to say, "A mammy has come." "Mammy," cried my wife, who was busy serving me.
Must be our neighbor come to see if I'm ready for the procession? Tell her to come in and take a seat. I'll see her in a moment.
The boy said coldly, "She is not asking for you. She is asking for father." "What?"
Who is she? Asked my wife with a sudden scowl on her face. Trembled within myself. I muttered with a feeble, faint surprise, "Asking for me, ha, ha. Must be a mistake."
My wife set the vessel down and went out of the room, saying under her breath, "Let me see." The boy tried to follow her. I called him back.
"Boy, fetch me that water jug." When he came close to me with the jug, I asked in a whisper, "Who is there? What is she like?"
"I don't know. She was also in the temple dancing." Oh, I knew now.
My worst fears were confirmed. All the fine moments of the evening, the taste of exquisite food, everything was turning to gall on my tongue. I knew my wife.
Although I had given no occasion actually to test it, I knew that she could be fiercely jealous. Before I could decide in my head what to say and how to say it, she stood before me to ask, "That woman wants to see you. What's your connection with her?"
"Which woman?" I asked with affected innocence. I got up from my dinner, went out to rinse my hands, and, wiping my hands on a towel, came back to the hall.
"Bring the betel leaf and nut." I put on a deliberate look of unhurrying indifference. All the time I knew Rangi was waiting at the door. I chewed the betel leaves and went back to the kitchen.
My wife had settled down to her dinner, serving herself. She did not look up at me. I said, "Have you any food left, or have I eaten up everything?"
If there is nothing left, it was your own fault. You should not have excelled yourself in this manner. She essayed to smile. This amount of praise, very sincere, of course, had its effect. With lowered head, she was transferring food from the dining leaf to her mouth.
Now she looked up to say, "I have asked her to wait in the passage. I didn't want the neighbors to see her at our door." She had to lower her voice in order that it might not be heard by the person concerned.
I whispered back, you did right, and then, you could have asked her why she has come. Why should I? If it's your business, that's all.
I am not interested. I made a sound of being vexed and said, "What a nuisance. Must be something connected with the temple.
Can't rest even for a day." So muttering, I progressed in her direction. There she was, standing in the passage.
She had taken off her gaudy dance ornaments and costumes and was dressed in a plain sari. Even in the dark passage I could see the emphatic curves of her body. I stood away from her, at a safe distance, right at the inner doorway, and asked rather loudly, "What is the matter?" I did not want to carry on a whispered dialogue with her.
But she spoke in whispers. "I wanted to know how you were, master." I was touched by her solicitude.
"Oh, I'm all right. Nothing was really the matter. I saw everything, but could not come over, because I was on duty before the god."
"Oh," I said, feeling rather pleased. "Are your duties finished for the day? What about the procession? It's at 9 o'clock.
"I shall have to get back." "Oh," I said. "Won't you go with the procession, sir?"
she asked. My son had been standing around uneasily, but feeling rather shy in the presence of a dancing woman, he went away and hid himself in the kitchen. Rangi assumed even a softer and hoarser whisper to say, "He came to my house in the afternoon when I was at the temple and left a command that I should see him."
I grew apprehensive. "Don't go. Go back to your house and get away to the temple."
"Be with the crowd. He may come to my house again and set fire to it. Only my old mother is there, deaf and blind."
"Why should he set fire to your house? He is wild with me and wants to talk to me." "Talk to you?"
"He will probably murder you," I said. She brooded over my words.
I asked her, "Why don't you tell the police?" She shook her head. "He won't be afraid of the police."
"He is not afraid of anything. The police will laugh at me. What can they do?"
"He is not afraid of anything or anybody, that's what he is." "Don't go to him," I implored her. My wife had finished her dinner and was passing up and down on various minor errands, casting sly sidelong looks at the two of us in the dark passage.
Rangi was sobbing at the prospect before her. "I don't know what he will do to me. He has summoned me."
He confided in me. I betrayed his trust. I had to.
I hope you have taken precautions." "Oh, surely," I said with grand confidence and assurance. "We won't let a fellow like that get away with his ideas."
"You don't know him enough. He is afraid of nothing on earth or in heaven or in hell. We have our method for dealing with such fellows."
"We are a match for him," I said. "He is so strong and obstinate. If he thinks of something, he must do it. No one on earth can change his mind."
This woman seemed to be obsessed with the grandeur and invincibility of the man. I was not going to tolerate it. "Rangi, don't be carried away by the notions you have of that man.
He is just an ordinary, common bully. We know how to tackle him. Now what shall I do, sir? I have come to you because I don't know what to do."
I thought of going there and appeasing him to see if I could get him into a good mood to listen to my words. "I have also cooked his favorite pulav and have it here." She indicated a hamper of food.
"But you've said yourself that it's impossible to make him change his mind." She whispered seductively, "I'll try. A woman in my position leers her ways."
I don't know what she meant. It sounded mysterious. I said, "He may not let you go back to the procession. Don't go to him.
Go home. If I don't obey his summons, he may set fire to my house, with my blind mother not knowing what is happening. I'll arrange for the proper persons to guard your house."
Don't let him blackmail you into visiting him. He'll hold you back. He may even tie you up hand and foot."
I'll send the proper persons to guard your house, I said grandiosely, without the shred of a notion how I was going to accomplish anything. She brought her palms together in a salute and left me, and vanished into the moonlit street. I went back to my wife.
I found her tidying herself up in the dark anteroom, before a mirror. I said expansively, "You know what's the matter with that woman? How should it interest me?"
She asked. I was struck by the cold, indifferent tone in which she spoke. I don't know who she is, and I don't care.
She readjusted her sari and called, "Babu." He was at her side in a moment. "Coming to the temple?"
Yes, of course. He had already gone ahead to the outer door. I asked her, "Are you going to the temple?" "Yes," she said monosyllabically.
"But you said you would not go." I said. "Now I say I'm going, that's all there is to it," she said.
I could see even by the dim light that her ears were red. "I wanted to speak to you. I thought you might stay here and talk things over." She turned a deaf ear to what I was saying.
I followed her, mumbling, "You wanted me to stay at home, now you are going." I made myself sound pathetic. "Stay or go, it's all the same to me," she said, and was gone down the steps and down the road, with Babu prancing beside her.
She had not given me a chance even to shout and pick a quarrel with her. I didn't like to go in. I sat on the pure, looking in the direction in which she had gone.
What was the use? There was a silly little hope that she would repent her brusqueness and come back to make amends. My only other companion for the night was a street dog curled up in the gutter.
All the other living creatures of this area had gone to the temple. Not a soul remained at home, except the asthmatic in the 6th house, whom I could hear cough and expectorate. As I sat there and brooded, it gave me time to take stock.
The matter with me was that I was not able to say no to anyone, and that got me into complications with everyone from a temple prostitute to a taxidermist. I repeated to myself all the stinging rejoinders that I should have hurled at my wife. I should have behaved like one of my ancestors, often mentioned by my grand aunt, who used to bring home his concubine and have her dinner served by his wife.
So when my wife said, "What is your connection with her?" I should instantly have said, "Yes, you are right. I want to seduce Rangi or be seduced by her."
If my wife had said, "Of all women," I'd have replied, "Yes, of course, you are blinded by jealousy. She no doubt chews tobacco and looks coarse, but she has it. It comes through even when she whispers to you."
How can any man resist her? I'm sorry for you, but that's how it is. You should take more trouble to keep me in good humor.
There is no use losing your temper or sulking or snapping a reply. If I followed the same procedure, you'd not be able to stand it for a second. As a man, I have strength, no doubt, to stand all your nonsense.
But you should not strain it too much. That's all now, don't do it again. The moon came over the roof tile of the opposite row of houses, full and brilliant.
I could hear the hubbub of voices emanating from the temple half a mile away. It saddened me to be detached from all this activity. I felt like a man isolated by an infection. I had almost, as a sort of revenge on my wife, a plan to appear at the temple precincts and take a hand in the conduct of the procession.
Without creating a panic, I would gently navigate the chariot into a different route. Or perhaps if I rushed around a bit and met the DSP, I could change the permit for another route. There was not a person in that whole throng who could organize and guide a procession.
I swelled with pride. I was the one man who could still achieve results. But I was an outcast.
I felt nervous of going before the crowd again. I was not certain what I would do. Under the pressure of the crowd, if I should let out a cry again, that'd be the end of me.
It might have the desirable effect of making my wife regret her petulance, but it was also likely to see me bundled off to the Madras mental hospital by the next train. I remembered a boy, a brilliant fellow in the 3rd form, who strode up and down our Kabir Street for 3 days, singing all Tyagaraja's compositions night and day continuously, until he had covered most of that inspired saint's works. If he had been left alone for another day, he would have completed the repertory, but they seized and bundled him off by the 5 o'clock express to Madras. He came back a year later with a shaven head, but sober and quiet.
He was a friend of mine in my school days, and he confessed that he had sung Tyagaraja's compositions only because he was keen on letting the public get an idea of the versatility of that great composer, but now he was afraid even to hum the tunes in his bath. Our Kabir Street citizens had exacting standards of sanity. I didn't want to be seized and put onto the Madras train.
Or, even if I didn't create a scene, the crowd would look at me as if I had recovered from a fit of epilepsy. They would not let me go with the procession. All my old anxieties, which had been under a false lull, suddenly rose to the surface.
I took stock of the situation. What exactly was my cause for smugness now? I had done nothing to divert the procession. I had done nothing to disarm or dissuade Vasu. God knew what trick he might have up his sleeve.
He might do nothing more than fling a firecracker down from his window or bribe one of the torchbearers to hold the torch close to the leg of the elephant. All evening we had done nothing but discuss the various methods of maddening an elephant: a needle stuck into a coconut or banana and given it to swallow, an ant dropped in its ear, or a grain of sand in its eyes. It would be the easiest thing to drive an elephant mad, and if people were lucky they might get out of its range, or if they weren't a few might be caught and trampled to death.
Particularly if there was a stampede at that narrow bend on the market road, with the broad storm drain on one side and the small mountain of road metal, meant for the improvement of the road but untouched since 1945, heaped on the other. People would thank anyone who shot the elephant at that moment.
That poor elephant, enjoying all the fun today, decorated, happy, and playing with the crowd and children, he must return to the goddess on the mountain road and graze in the forests of those blue hills and continue to delight the children of all those villagers. Muthu hoped that by hiring out the elephant for processions he could earn enough money to build a tower for the temple of the goddess, which should be visible for 50 miles around. It was impossible to conceive of Kumars being dissected and stuffed and serving as an umbrella stand or wastebasket in some fashionable home in the Eastern or Western world.
I wanted to do something about it all. My wife had gone out, perhaps expecting me to act as the watchman of the house. Nice notion she had.
It'd be good to abandon the house and let her discover that after all she could not presume upon my goodness. Or even a better plan would be to lock the door and take the key away so that when she came back after midnight she might wonder how to get to her bed. It was NCARING 10, and the procession should have started now.
No one could judge when it would arrive at the fountain. While on the road, the piper might start on a big alapana, and until he attained certain flights and heights of a particular melody and returned to earth, the procession would not move, even if it took an hour. So by stages and after all the stops, it might take hours for the procession to cover the distance between the temple and the fountain.
The procession should have started an hour ago, but there was no sign of the music yet. Only the hubbub of the voices indicated that the crowd was still waiting for it. If it had started, I'd have heard the voices and music moving nearer, and above all my wife would have come back home.
However temperamental she might be, I knew she would not go with the procession along with that mass of crowd. She had enough sense to return home in time. I felt angry at being chained to the house.
I would go into the outer fringes of the crowd, unrecognized, and study the situation. I shut the door behind me and stepped down. I went down to the end of the street.
I saw two men coming in my direction and I stopped them to ask, "Has the procession started?" "No, they are waiting for ornaments for the elephant. Someone has gone to fetch them from the Talapur temple, head ornaments of real gold."
They are waiting for that. 10 miles up and 10 miles down, and perhaps an hour getting the ornaments out of the temple walls. No chance of the procession starting before 2 a.m. What madness.
Did it mean that my wife was going to be at the temple till 2? With the boy? I was in a measure also relieved. Every hour's delay seemed to me an hour's reprieve.
I went back home. If the procession was starting late, then there was no purpose in my loitering at the temple gate. At home, I laid myself down on the pure. If I was to be a watchman, I'd better be one thoroughly, not a haphazard one.
I didn't want the house to be looted. This was just the chance thieves waited for, when every householder would have gone out to the festival. Lying on the mat on the pure, as I kept gazing on the moonlit street, I fell asleep. I woke up hours later as I heard drums and pipe music approach nearer. I knew that the procession was on Market Road, parallel to our house.
I grew worried about my wife and son, thinking that they were still out. On second thoughts I went inside, and I saw her asleep in her bed, with the child asleep also. I must have been too soundly asleep indeed not to have known when she arrived.
She must have come long ago and gone to sleep. She ought to have wakened me. How could she when she preferred to practice all that coldness toward me? In order to mete out the same treatment to her, I went back to my mat on the pure.
I lay tossing on my mat. Far off, the piper's music came from the procession. I followed it, visualizing all the stages of its progress.
Now it must be passing the elementary school conducted on the top story of the chairman's sweet mart, a rickety terrace which would come down any day, but no one could prevent its being there because it was the chairman's building and was certified to be safe. Someday when it came down, it was going to imperil the lives of 100 school children and 6 or 8 teachers. But so far it had lived up to the optimistic estimate of the municipal authorities, and most of its ex-pupils were now adults working and earning a living in various walks of life all over India.
I preferred to send Babu to another school, however. The drummer made enough noise to shatter the foundations of this precarious building, but it was a matter of courtesy for the procession to stop there, and the piper had saved his breath for his masterpiece, Bhairavi. He was commencing a most elaborate, intricate rendering of this melody, and that meant the gathering would stand around him, the god would repose in his chariot, the elephant would stand ahead of the procession with the mahout asleep on its back.
People would crowd around the piper and behave as if they had no further distance to cover. It was much better that the procession halted itself there than at the fountain. The time was around midnight now, and it would take at least an hour for the procession to approach the market fountain.
I made up my mind to join the procession and mix with the crowd an hour hence, and till then there was no harm in sleeping. Bhairavi was as good heard here in a condition of half sleep as anywhere, and so I allowed myself to be lulled by it, a melody that was my favorite in any case. It brought to my mind my childhood days, when visiting musicians used to come as our guests.
There was a room in our house known as the musician's room, for we always had some musician or other staying with us. As my father was very proud of his familiarity with all the musicians in South India and organized their recitals in our town. It had been one of the charges leveled against him by the opposing lawyer. He was supposed to have squandered the family funds in entertaining musicians.
Now this room was used as a storing place for old bottles. It was the great joke in those days that when anyone questioned why old bottles were kept so safely, the answer would be that if my uncles sued for them, they might be given their due shares. The room also contained about 70 terse philosophical works, the entire philosophical library collected by my grandfather or someone before him in Sanskrit and Tamil, along with bronze images used for worship.
They had been willed to the third uncle but were left in our custody because my uncle was in the railways and never stayed in the same place for more than 3 months. He was never known to have opened any book in his life after leaving school, but still he occasionally sent us a postcard to inquire if the volumes of philosophy were safe. Whenever my mother got into an argumentative mood, she would arraign my father for being a custodian of other people's property, and demand to know why he should not throw the articles out and get rid of all that responsibility.
But my father was fond of his brothers, whatever they might do, and told her not to peep into that room as there was sufficient space in the rest of the house for her to mind. I must have fallen asleep. When I woke up, Bhairavi was no longer being played but some other tune, and the music was coming from close quarters across the row of buildings on Market Road.
If my judgment was right, the procession must now be near the silkware house. The next stop would be the fountain. I was seized with anxiety.
The procession was nearing the range of Vasu's window. What reason had I for my smugness? What right had I to presume that Muthu and the rest would have succeeded in restraining Vasu?
Suppose they had done nothing, and a torchbearer scalded the toe of the elephant and drove it mad? Just what Vasu would be waiting for all along. My duty now was clear.
I must go and keep the procession away from the fountain and turn it into a side street. There was no use lying here and cogitating, while every minute a vast assembly was moving toward its doom. I should do something about it.
I got up briskly. I could hear my wife stirring, awake and by the pipe and band. She would probably come out to watch from the end of Kabir Street, in which case I did not want to meet her. I walked across, opened the back door of my press, and shut the door behind me.
I was going to make a last-minute attempt to stop Vasu. He was not such a bad fellow after all. He would listen to me.
He was considerably mellower than he used to be. I looked up at the attic. There was no light in it.
Of course he would put out all lights. He was the Prince of Darkness, and in darkness were his activities to be conducted. Somehow I was seized with a sudden access of wonderful and effective plans.
They were not shaped very clearly in my mind yet, but I was positive that I was going to come through it all. If you had asked me to lay a blueprint of my activities before you, I should perhaps have fumbled, but deep within me the plan was ready. I would first steal up to his room and walk softly to his side. He was sure to be watching the window.
Why not stun him from behind and save everyone all the worry and trouble of argument? Not practicable, actually. One might talk of finishing off a cobra with a staff of bamboo, but it was always more likely that the cobra would prove smarter.
Vasu might after all not be facing the window but actually facing the door. Non-violence would be the safest policy with him. Mahatma Gandhi was right in asking people to carry on their fight with the weapon of non-violence. The chances of getting hurt were less in this process.
I squeezed myself through the little fence between my press and the staircase. He was undoubtedly upstairs. The jeep was outside.
It might be a good idea to set its petrol tank on fire. That would keep him busy until the procession passed. He might make a pulp of me if he discovered me in the process, but why not?
No one was going to miss me. My wife was actually separated from me now, and there was no one to bemoan the loss. Babu was likely to miss me for a few days, but children adapted themselves to new circumstances with surprising ease.
It was pleasing to reflect that my wife would learn a lesson, namely that sulking did not pay and that it did no one any good. If Rangi spoke to me on an important matter, the thing for a rational being to do would be to ask what exactly it was. Arid approach things in a scientific frame of mind. No wonder Vasu was bitter against the whole world for its lack of scientific approach.
If people were scientific-minded, they would not jump to conclusions when a man spoke to Rangi in a half-dark passage. I was at the foot of the staircase. The hyena was still there but pushed to the side. It must have been a wasted labor for Vasu, absolutely unsaleable stuff.
It was surrounded by a few other odds and ends of dead creatures, nothing outstanding among them, but a miscellany of small game, a wild squirrel, a fox, a jungle dog, and a small cheetah, and so forth, and several reptiles. Vasu seemed to have turned his attention to small industries in keeping with our government's zeal for small industries nowadays. The smell of hide and packing cases overwhelmed me.
I went up. I had presumed all along that the door would be open. What if it should be shut?
I should knock on it and allow events to develop. I was going to stop him from disturbing the procession, that was certain, but how was a question that I still could not answer. I was prepared to lose my life in the process.
I found the door open. I gave it a gentle push and peeped in. There he was as I had visualized, beside the window, on a long easy chair.
The lights, the kitchen vapor lamps, and the torches of the procession were already illuminating the room, and there were moving shadows on the walls. The band and the pipe and the shouts of the men pulling the chariot along could be heard down below. I could see his silhouette at the window, where he seemed to have made himself comfortable, with a pillow under his head.
He had stretched his legs on a stool, he had his timepiece on another small table, and his gun lay on the floor within his reach. I could see so much by the flares flickering along the wall through the narrow window. A few other silhouettes, the small tiger cub and some other animals, stood out in the semi-darkness.
He didn't move. That was a good sign. He had probably fallen asleep waiting for the procession to come along.
Not all the drumming, they could at least have had the sense to pass the spot noiselessly, as a precaution, seemed to make any impression on him. He was obviously a sound sleeper, thank God. My decision was swift. I would make a dash for his gun and seize it.
My heart palpitated and my breath came and went like a bellows as I crawled toward the gun at his side. If he woke up before I reached it, that would be the end of me. I had started crawling like one of those panthers of the Mempi jungle. The distance between me and the gun was only a dozen feet.
I covered half of it, and the other half seemed interminable. My knees were sore, but I felt that it was for a good cause that I was skinning them. He was still asleep.
As my fingers reached the cold butt of his gun, I could have swooned with excitement. I had never touched a gun before and felt scared. I rose to my feet and covered him with the gun.
Below the window, the procession was passing rather quickly, as I thought. I wished I could go and take a look at it, but he was between me and the window, and if he slept through it, that would be the best arrangement possible. But if he woke up, I had the gun at point-blank range.
I would follow the method of cinemas and command him not to stir until the procession passed. If he made the slightest movement, I would pull the trigger. My finger was on it already.
Although I had no practice with guns, I knew if I fiddled with the trigger the shot was bound to go OIF. I had the muzzle directly at his head, keeping it away, just out of his reach, in case he should try to snatch it from my hand. I would hold him until the procession passed our road, and then how was our encounter to conclude?
I couldn't say. I felt rather worried about it, although I felt triumphant that there had arisen such a simple solution to our problems. I couldn't keep my eyes off him, although I felt curious to watch the procession.
From my place I could see the upper parts of it, the top of the chariot, its flower-decked crest and the little bulbs sparkling on it, the head of the elephant brilliant with the gold plates from Talapur, and the hunched form of the mahout. While passing he cast a look through our window. I thought he had been advised to drive fast. In a moment he was out of view, and soon the procession itself was gone.
The room was bereft of the reflections on its walls, and the drums and pipes sounded far away, leaving a faint aroma of jasmine and roses in their wake. Just at this moment I was startled by the alarm bell of the timepiece going off. I gave a jump, the gun dropped from my hand, and I made a dash for the landing and out of Vasu's reach within a second.